Good.
Yeah, good. Good morning. How's everybody doing? So, little pop quiz. I'll throw a few out here. So I have a teenage daughter. I'm very used to blank stares when I speak. So I'm going to try to get something different today. So first of all, who's in IT? Okay. How many of you are IT engineers? Okay. What about OT? Okay, that's telling. Excuse me? Oh, operations technology. ICS, SCADA, operations engineers. Okay. So that's interesting. I'll come back to that in a minute. That's kind of really where I focus. Vendors? Okay. All right. Management and execs? All right. That gives me a good idea. So.
People afraid to raise their hand?
Yeah. Those trying to go under the radar. That's all right. So I was trying to think about, all right, what do I address? This is a hot topic, IoT. I mean, I'm sitting here during Dan's talk, which, by the way, I haven't ever addressed Congress. I have responded to questioning by authorities, just not Congress. But even the panel, and I'm sitting there nodding, yes. So the reason for me asking all this is, what? Brothers and sisters, we're all wearing choir robes. I think all of us agree here what needs to be done, at least at a high level. I mean, we're hashing out some of the details. The difference is we are not the rest of the world. We're a unique set of people. There are specific skills in here. It's funny, I sat down, I look at Rob, the gentleman next to me, and I'm like, I know you. Barcelona, right? We're on a panel in Barcelona. This is how small our world is. So, my background is IT. When I left there as an IT engineer, I went into sales. I was a sales engineer for a lot of years. So my IT buddies started looking at me funny. Like, oh, you've gone into sales. Then I moved into product marketing. I thought that was a step up. IT guys won't talk to me anymore. Sales guys make fun of me on calls. Mom won't return my call. But what happens is, so I go out and I talk to customers a lot about the things that we're talking about. And a lot of times I run into brick walls. We get it here. So I don't have to sell you. So I think actually what I decided I'm going to do today is you're all going to become marketing people and salespeople. So trust me, you'll like it. But I will say this, just one other thing, because obviously I'm very stream of consciousness. The slides here are to help me focus again. If I see something shiny, I go off on a tangent. Yeah, see, I already lost the thought. There you go. I'll come back to something about marketing and whatever, I forgot. Okay, so Internet of Things, I think we all have this. So anyways, but what I'm going to do as I go through this is talk about psychology. I mean, there's something that we're up against here. So what I'm going to do is kind of frame it from the business perspective. I mean, I think to an extent we get that. A couple of folks mentioned it earlier, having to speak business. So I'm not going to go as technical. I'll cover some of it, but it's more the psychology that we're dealing with. So, first of all, I mean, let's just talk scale, and I think we all pretty much have this. But when we are talking to our customers, I think Toyota came up as an example of building in security. It's profitable. It's better components make for better value. But one of the things I think of, it's I don't know. People say, all right, I'm a musician. Oh, look at the Beatles. Look what they did. These 4 guys got together and they did great things. You just have to do X. Well, the reason we talk about the Beatles is because they're the Beatles. If everybody could have done that, if I could have done that, I wouldn't be on this stage now. Are you kidding me? But it's because those are the ones that are a little more unique. I think the example, and I just call it out because I think it's a conversation I had yesterday about, I have a friend that just moved from the West Coast to New York, who, starting a new career, works in social work. Doesn't pay well, as you can imagine. Living in Queens, and she called me up yesterday, said, I got offered this job, I don't want it. They want to send me to Brooklyn. I have no idea where in Brooklyn. It's dangerous. And I said, well, how much money do you make now? Well, I don't have a job. Does this job pay? Yes. Do you need to pay bills while you find what you want to do? Yes. Take the job. So when it comes to making decisions, a lot of what happens is I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what's perfect. What's my reality dictate? And that's kind of where I work. So if we think around the fact, all right, so the IoT does great things. I don't know if any of you have heard of the case studies in Barcelona, amazing things that happen, cities are looking to do, reduce traffic and whatnot, and which is near and dear to my heart. I live in Worcester. It took me 2.5 hours to get here this morning. It's 45 miles if you don't know. So I'm all about that. But when you look at it though, what the non-technical part of the business is looking at is they understand it expands the attack surface. When I look at numbers like these, when we go in and talk, in a few years, we're expecting there to be 7 times, the human population of things. These are things that are connected. That is a huge attack surface. I think we'll see, kind of to Dan's point earlier too, what we're doing to defend now isn't going to work. It's just scaled out. So these are what they're thinking of. How do I pay for that? If you saw the New York Times article yesterday about the CEO, the departure of the CEO from Target, there was a comment in there that they underfunded security. And now he's out, but that's a business decision that was made at a particular time. So while we all get it, our audience doesn't always get it. So I think one of the key facets, as I mentioned, I started in IT back in '98. And does anyone here remember the love letter virus? Yeah, I lost 3 days of my life because of that virus. I worked for a large corporation a little west of here. 3 days. We had 50,000 users in our global address list. We actually had one person in Detroit who was feeling lots of love because if you knew what the cleanup took, it was not easy. It wasn't like a remote, remediate. We had to send somebody from the PC group, go out, clean that, kick this person off their machine, do this. 3 times they fired off that virus. But if you remember, the virus itself it was a nuisance. It didn't do anything. There was no payload. It just DOSed us, basically. But the thing that that I've seen through this is we still had some sort of parity between defenders and attackers. As things are becoming more connected, granted, we always seem to be one step behind, but we're kind of on a parallel trajectory. The thing is now we're introducing, industrial devices, from the ICS side, for example, are now going into this environment. The difference is the sophistication of the attacker is here, whereas the barrier to entry is now here. So we do have that. That is a big problem. And you look at it, and they keep just churning these things out. So this is where we're really finding ourselves today, and I don't see it changing. I'm generally a pretty positive guy. Here I get a little less positive. Especially now that I've been in the industrial space for a while. My relatives, they'll read about the Syrian Electronic Army. And they'll look at me and go, all right, you work in critical infrastructure. Is it that bad? And I say, yes. And then they wait for me to laugh. And then I don't laugh. And next question is, should I buy water? Well, not yet. But it's not going to change. This isn't going to go away. We can't hide our heads in the sand. So as long as there's money to be made, it's going to happen. And again, we look at this, we have the conversation of doing the right things. Again, having at one point worked in the retail world, margins are very, very thin. We actually had a class, this company that I worked for, they educate the workforce on how they made a profit. And you realized how thin those margins are. Those decisions are not necessarily being made on the best. It's what's good for now, what gets us through the next quarter, how do we beat the competition. So when you think about the gains the business can have from the efficiencies here by putting sensors out there, we were just having a conversation earlier, talking to one of the folks here about, his customers putting sensors out. I think it was in, storage device, actual, it was a medical company, but being able to track inventory. So if you look at it, I think the analogy earlier was, if I can spend $5 now and make $10 over a year for 5 years, 5 years, guess which one I'm going to choose. So as these things are changing, that's the side that we have to appeal to. Okay. Yeah, pretty much this. I think one of the things too that we talk so much about security that I think gets missed is the human element, mistakes. So I have what I call day one, the day one mistake. So whenever I'd start a new job when I was in IT, I was bound to screw something up. So my first IT job out of MCSE school, I walk into the server room, it was a software company, and up in Waltham, small medical company, but I walk in, I look, so our server room was all these HP Vectra PCs, and I remember on the test you look for a UPS. I look under the table and there's a UPS. And so one of the things I had to do was change the backup tapes. So I come in, so I survived the first day. I didn't blow anything up the first day. The second day, I walked in, I looked down, I said, this is a slotted panel. So I hit the eject button, all the lights went off on the server. And the box is called Dev1. And if I mentioned this was a software development company, that was not the eject button. That was the power button. So by the time I got back to my desk, everyone's going, where's Dev1? I go, hi, I'm the new guy. That was me. I've pretty much done that everywhere. But it's human error we have to look at too, and I think that's a big part of the conversation. And even on the industrial side, the reality is, I'll talk about FUD in a little bit. I think particularly on the industrial side, they're very FUD allergic. Nobody likes, everyone knows what FUD is, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, sky's falling. So it's a measured approach, how do we address this? But, all right, so, as I mentioned, so psychology, I love psychology. If you went to any one of my family gatherings, you'd know why. But there's been some work done, McDonough School of Business at Georgetown talks about the near miss, but I think this really applies to what we're trying to do. So when we speak to management, but think about it yourselves, I'm guilty of all this as well, but this is fascinating. Trust me, it's fascinating. You guys are going to be so excited. But so I'll apply it to myself. So I put a lot of air miles on. I don't want to tell if this flight turned out successfully. I mean, I'm here. But so we were coming in to Logan, landing looked normal, everything looked great. All of a sudden the plane just starts climbing again. You can hear him and we just start banking. And so what had happened was there was a plane taxiing across the runway as we were coming in. So they had to abort the landing circle and come back. So somebody made a mistake. That plane should not have been there. Whose mistake it was, I don't know. But obviously there's no collision, no fatalities or injuries. We were actually even on time. Was that a successful flight? You don't have to answer out loud. So if you say yes, that's the majority. We have a tendency to think in binary. So that was a near miss, but it was successful. The outcome was great. What if we look at that as a near failure? So the fact that this could have almost gone very, very wrong. This could have had disastrous results. So when we look at it from that perspective, I mean, that's what we look at. So when you're going in and talking to why you need an IPS, funding for IPS. Did I mention we make IPSs? When you're looking for that, it's this idea of, hey, we've been fine. We've survived this before. We don't need to do anything else. Apparently everything we're doing is working. So if we get this idea of the near miss, we already went through that. Oh yeah, so the FAA took that up, not because of my flight, but in general, they started looking at things as a near miss and they started crunching data. And they looked at reports from the tower, reports from pilots and so on. And so based on this idea of looking at it from a near failure versus a success, they started changing flight patterns and approaches and things like that to the way the aircraft approach these airports. And what they found was over 10 years, there's an 83% reduction in airline-related fatalities. So the positive outcome, instead of, again, going, I dodged the bullet, I must be doing something right. I dodged the bullet, wow, I must be really doing something wrong. But it's human mentality. I mean, one time driving out here, zipping along doing about 80 down 495, something was in the road, I cut the wheel, I cut it a little too much. It came pretty close to rolling the car. I had some people in the car, we all went white-knuckled, nobody spoke for another half hour. Realizing I was really late getting here today, do you think I recalled that? Probably only because I was thinking about this. Did it slow me down? No. I survived it. Okay. So, again, talking about risk, I think the approach with risk, it was involved in a conference once too, where the idea was, is risk management bound to fail in the industrial world, industrial control systems? I argued no. I don't think any of you were there, so I'll reuse the analogy. When I looked at it, I go, all right, if I did a risk assessment of my home, I didn't have a motion sensor I work from home. I don't have a motion sensor in my office. I have one in the living room, and I have a lot of equipment down there. My batteries are dead in my fire alarm. And, my house is completely exposed to airborne ninja assault. So, what makes the most sense? And that's my point. Am I going to spend, I don't know who makes a ninja defense system. So I can only imagine. There you go, thank you. See, and I'm the marketing guy, you're the sales guy, I don't understand. I'll write that RFP right up. But the idea of going, okay, I can do some basic things here. I can spend a few cents on batteries. I can put a new motion sensor in. And I realized, because I was addressing a bunch of security researchers, I said, I live in Worcester and I don't have enough home security. I have since called ADT. There is a motion sensor in my office. But this point is, we have to do this every day, and I think appealing to that side is how we're going to get through this. So, because you think about what the risk is, it's neither positive nor negative. It just all depends on how it's deployed or employed or whatever. But on the negative side of it, and I think especially when it comes into cybersecurity, and I'll wax a little philosophical here, is this idea of point in time. We're led to this, like I mentioned, we dodged the bullet. Oh, what we're doing is perfectly safe. We're doing it right. I used to cover Latin America for a while, and I was in Brazil, and I don't speak Portuguese, but I knew exactly what this engineer was saying when we were talking about our products and breaches. I knew he was saying, oh no, we've never had a breach, so we're fine. So they just, because nothing's hit the news, because nothing's obvious, but this point in time perspective is kind of a fallacy here. So I'll give you another example of this. So going back to the company where I popped the tape, actually hit the power. Worked there for about a year or so, and there were two of us on call, and all of a sudden my phone goes off. We had a really bad power storm, electrical storm. And so we go in the next day, and like I said, day one, fresh from MCSE school, I looked and I checked, all the UPSs were there, great. I get calls that all of our servers had gone down. They just all hard crashed. And, and I just gave away the next slide. But, so, yeah, and here's what happened. So what had happened is when I went to my manager, so then I looked behind the UPSs. Only one of them had an outlet that had anything plugged into it, and it was a monitor. So the monitor shut down gracefully. Great. And when I looked at my boss and I said, what is this? None of this stuff's plugged in. He said, well, we haven't had an outage in 13 years. I said, but we did last night. He goes, yeah, but we haven't had an outage in 13 years. We had one last night. So if you've ever seen Dude, Where's My Car? Dude, what's it say? Sweet. No, what's it say? Dude. It was just, but this mentality of we've been safe all this time, we don't need to change anything, and that's what happened. So we were done. So there's this idea that I get into called Datakinesis. And one of the objections I hear is something, we don't have any Oh no, I'll go into it in a minute. See, this is what happened. I saw something shiny, I got distracted. But the fact that something that we do in a computer system will indeed have a physical result. So there's a couple of these things. So in LA, any of you guys know this story? Probably early in the 2000s, LA traffic controllers, their operations center, they were going to go on strike. So what they did is somebody made a threatening remark to the press. They all got locked out of the systems in the building, but of course a couple guys got a manager's credentials and they logged in. So what they did was, very strategically, change the red light length at 4 key intersections. So they didn't go and take the whole thing, they didn't take the whole thing down. They did something very, very subtle. But what happened is traffic started backing up at all these key intersections over time. Next thing you knew, you had widespread traffic problems. So it was very, very subtle. And so, going back to the FUD thing, when you think about what's going to happen, this is where I get concerned about breaches in IoT and in industrial. Think if a pharmaceutical manufacturer, rather than shutting down production, imagine if someone can go in and tamper with the system that measures out the ingredients in a drug. Nobody knows. Nothing's gone down. I guess, the example is Stuxnet right there. But think of what that could happen. How far out would that get shipped? How much damage would that do to people? And you wouldn't know until people started getting sick. So something to think of. In this case, luckily, there were no physical injuries. Want to guess what I'm talking about here in Iran? So we know that one. I won't beat that horse to death. But I will say this, though. If you go, and again, I don't know, because I know you mentioned ICS and SCADA. I don't know if this is your experience as well. I notice it depends on the geography. Around the Persian Gulf, you mentioned Stuxnet. Everybody takes it very, very seriously. You mention it in the US, we're talking about the boogeyman. So it's something to overcome. So this is very regional. In Lodz, Poland, a very smart kid took a TV remote control, went to the switching yard of a commuter rail station, started changing the tracks. He would switch the tracks. And of course, nobody knew about it until 4 trains derailed, and there were 4 dozen injuries there. And then kind of this one, it was in the New York Times, yet nobody seemed to make a big deal about it. I don't know if you guys heard about this. NSA is building a data center out in Utah, so big that it needs its own power supply. Oddly enough, by the time when this article was written earlier in the year, there'd been 13, or was it 10 unexplained major faults in that power system that was delaying everything a year, and it was still undetermined as to what the cause was. So if you think, I don't know, I think somebody in Natanz was having a laugh at that, but that's my own personal opinion there. So these things are real. But again, going to the anti-FUD, I think we talked about, I think the thing is we talk to people, human error is something that we're most worried about. The guy that kills the power on a crucial system instead of popping out the tape. The guy that does, diagnostics on a network card during the middle of the day that takes down a whole business unit. That was my next job. I was there a month when that happened. I could have sworn that Nick would have said, "Don't do this, you'll cut off the department," but surprise. That was awkward. But those are the things that I think that are the real threats. So when we're talking about really what are the threats to the IoT, I think these are the biggest ones. How do we prevent us from doing silly things? How do we do this within, the budget constraints that we have? When somebody does the simple math, you go back to Target, they had chip and pin. They were doing, they ran that and as a trial, and I said, "Oh, it's too expensive." And they canned it. Chip and pin's been big in Europe for some time. But now they've gotten religion on it. But these are the things I think that are going to be most scary. So this is a little more focused on ICS, but I want to, and how am I doing on time, by the way? Oh, wrap it up. I'm sure you guys are bummed. But here's the thing too, and I think that we get into, but as I mentioned, you mentioned Stuxnet in the US, and it's like you're talking about, the Easter Bunny or somebody like that. And there's this notion of the air gap. And I think anybody here, so the idea is I can be physically separate and nothing is going to happen to me because I'm physically separate. If you read David Sanger's report on how Stuxnet get in, there's maintenance guys. Came in with infected laptops and they got on and they did it and poof, there it goes. So my argument is if there are humans in the mix, you're vulnerable. I don't care how trusted they are, what they're doing, it's always going to come down to the humans, whether they make mistakes, whether they walk it in completely unknowingly, because at some point all this stuff gets connected. So in the interest of time, I'll leave it there. I'll get some blank stares. I was going to say, if you have any thoughts, feel free to shout them out now. If you disagree with me, shoot me an email. If you agree with all this, please let everyone hear about it. But I don't know, any questions, thoughts, comments, violent dissent? Did I mention there's free beer and wine over at MIT? Yes, please.
So, so you're at Cisco Systems. So Cisco is traditionally networking infrastructure, as well as some home-based infrastructure as well, Wi-Fi routers, set-top boxes, right? Okay. So as you're sort of in the industrial systems part of Cisco, as the conversations are going on within the company and that you're a part of, and keeping in mind some of the things that Dan talked about, do you see, does this seem like kind of these security problems that you're talking about, the mindset of the psychology, is that really anything that Cisco can address either at the kind of product design level, at the sort of training and sales or training and marketing level? Like,
Sure.
if we're really talking about changing human behavior, which is difficult, what can a company like Cisco, with its resources, actually do to kind of bend that behavior in the way that's going to be helpful to your customers, that's going to improve the environment?
You bring up a very good point, and that's, I must have seen something shiny for not mentioning this. Changing human behavior. That's not something I'd say we necessarily focus on. We have services and consultants that can go and talk to them. I think the real thing is deploying for the real world. I mean, this is what we're up against. These are the arguments we hear from a non-technical perspective. So I think it's being able to design and deploy and protect within the reality that we see today, not pretty much trying to level the whole playing field and then design from a point of perfection.
Okay.
Yes?
Do you think security awareness programs are at all helpful in dealing with security with the human factor? Or maybe they're the wrong program.
You know what? I used to buy that. I'm the only security guy in my house. And I'm ready to segment the rest of the family. And no, but what I've done with the little one, by the way, if you've ever read Skata and Me, it's one of the first books I gave her, so she's reading that right now. But you know what? I used to. I'm moving away from that. I think some of the basics, but I think people who don't already care about security or have an interest, it's going to be really hard to convince them. So I think it's a matter of putting policies in place and going, you know what? We do it this way to enable your job. So I think, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's more about tell them what they need to know, and then put the policies in place, and just this will help you.
Questions? Mark, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Mark Blackmer from Cisco Systems. Hold on,